the experimental data, as even though weak, that excited me and impressed me literally as a teenager, which got me in so interested in the whole area, was that at whatever level the statistical significance was, and that's a separate conversation, but whatever it was no different in telepathy dependent upon the distance. So if the distance were literally shielded sitting across the table or across the city, that the statistical result would be the same. And as you said, and in a precognition experiment, it would also be the same. So if you look at any of these, the level of statistical significance is at the same level. Now, to me, maybe simplistically, I see only two possible explanations for this. Number one, you won't like the number one, is that the statistical significance is an aberration and there's really no effect whatsoever. The second is that the mechanism involved, and I'm not going to use the word physics because it potentially would be beyond physics, but the mechanisms involved is of a totally different character than anything else we're used to.
I like number two.
Yeah, I don't know number two.
I've heard the hypothesis that our statistics are not really valid. If that's true, then dozens of other sciences are going to fall by the wayside because they use the same basic analysis techniques.
Yeah, and you know, that's not an impossibility. There's been, you know, a lot of studies recently that shows 40% of psychology, peer-reviewed psychology work is non-repeatable. So, I mean, there are complexities here.
Yes.
But to follow you on number two, because, you know, I hope number two is correct. I mean, I like this stuff. I hope it's real, but I'm not going to fool myself. And I know you've used that phrase yourself. I mean, that's one thing. Maybe I've used it a lot. Maybe I learned it from you. I don't remember, but I know you've said that, and I like that. But I look at one of the biggest mysteries in fundamental physics is the vast differential between the power of gravity and the power of electromagnetism. So I forgot what that is. It's like 10 to the 40th difference in power. And one of the theories is, just one, is that the reason is that gravity is sort of leaking through multi-dimensional space in some way. Now, this has nothing to do with ESP or anything. That's pure ways to understand this vast difference in order of magnitudes between two of the most fundamental things in physics. So to explain that big of a difference, they're struggling to find some radically new mechanism. And they come up with multiple dimensions beyond the four that we know, and ways of doing that. Not been proven, of course, but that's a way of thinking. So my second hypothesis would be that if it's real and you have no differentiation between space and time, because precognition is effect over time, and clairvoyance or telepathy is effect over space. So basically we're saying ESP, if it's real to the degree that it's real, it's operating independent of space and time.
Let's make that even more complicated, because any precognition experiment is both a space and a time separation experiment, because the Earth has moved several thousand miles by the time the information is created in the future. Yeah. I'll add a third hypothesis here, that this is going to call for a state-specific science to really make a difference in the end. And you probably know about my paper on the creation of state-specific sciences back in 1970, something like that. In altered states of consciousness, such as might be produced by meditation, psychedelic drugs, or things like that, sometimes there are totally different ways of thinking. So my hope is that a state-specific science will make sense of this someday, make sense of it, by which I mean not only will it be understandable to at least the people trained in going into that particular altered state, but they'll then be able to actually manipulate the effect and prove that they have some control over it. You know, like some people say, I've got a better radio system and I can prove it. because you can hear me on the other side of the earth instead of just a block down the street or something like that.
So
I
your
was, I
so
was told,
your go ahead.
I was told that Einstein, for instance, was very much a tactile kind of thinker. He had some imagery that was about how things felt. And he apparently did a lot of his creative thinking that way. He had to turn it back into mathematics at the end to publish it for other people because we're not trained in how to communicate tactually, that sort of thing. But he may have been working in a different kind of state of consciousness that way. I've had indications from a number of scientists in various other fields that when they're actually working in a discovery kind of way, their mind works in an entirely different way from normal. But they can't say that when they actually publish their paper. They've got to go through the proper forms and make it reasonable sounding and logical and so forth. And they can produce results from it. That may be what gets developed, but that's a hope on the future. I don't know whether that'll work now or